to the speaker event with King's Politics. Today we're honoured to be able to invite Ms Lau as our speaker for our society. Ms Lau, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for agreeing to this interview and for your generosity in inviting us here to this lovely office of the Democratic Party of Hong Kong.
You're welcome.
So, as a long-serving member of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong, both before and after the British handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997, you were the first woman elected to the legislature by popular vote. You were also a veteran of the pro-democratic camp in Hong Kong and served as chairperson of the Democratic Party. So, Ms Lau, could you start us off with a brief insight into the Democratic Party, its mission, its goals, its work, and your work with them?
Well, the Democratic Party, as we said, have been formed for quite a long time, and its aim is to help Hong Kong to make sure we can continue to enjoy our freedoms, the rule of law, and personal safety, and of course to improve the people's livelihood. And we also want to fight for democratic elections, because even up to now, we do not have democratic elections to choose the Hong Kong government. But the Democratic Party accepts that Hong Kong is part of China, and but we are a city. The Chinese government calls us a special administrative region, and according to the agreement that China signed with Britain in 1984, China promised to allow Hong Kong people, after the handover in 1997, that we will have one country, two systems. So that means we will be different from the communist or the socialist system in mainland China. And the people here will enjoy a free lifestyle, which of course is more freedoms than the people enjoy in mainland China. And we will have the rule of law, independent judiciary, personal safety, capitalist system, and whereby people are free to have their own property. There's no exchange control. People are free to choose their jobs, to stay here or to leave. So this is the free lifestyle that we enjoyed under British colonial rule. And although we've never had democratic elections, but it is ironic that for many decades, the Hong Kong people enjoy a level of freedom and personal safety and the rule of law, which is much higher than what people in some countries which have periodic elections, but they are not as free and as safe as us. And but of course, in the last 2 or 3 years, things changed very drastically in Hong Kong. And now, many people, well, some people, maybe many, are very frightened and very worried, particularly young people who think that they don't have much of a future in Hong Kong. Yeah. And that's why many are leaving Hong Kong. And because the British government has a new policy of allowing people who hold the British national overseas passport to go to live in Britain for 5 years, and then for 1 more year after that, they can apply for British citizenship. My party's job is, of course, we want to ensure that people can continue to stay here or to leave freely. But we still want to fight for the freedoms, the personal safety that we loved. But it's getting more and more difficult. And as we speak, there are quite a number of members of my party who are in prison. And more people fear that I could be arrested quite soon. And so it is very sad to see a very free and vibrant city, which has been free for so many decades, suddenly, in just 1 or 2 years, things could just change beyond recognition. But my party will continue to do our bit. We don't know when the Hong Kong government will force us to disband, like it has forced other NGOs to disband. So this is a very difficult time for Hong Kong.
Amongst these difficulties that Hong Kong continues to face and has faced for its history since the handover in '97, what do you consider to have been some of the greatest achievements of the Democratic Party, the pan-democratic camp, and perhaps of your own work yourself in achieving and helping to work towards these goals?
I think I would not say it is achievement of my party, because my party is very small and we only have a few hundred members and a small number in the legislative council and also in the district councils. But I would say that it is the achievement of the Hong Kong people. Because, for the last few years, I think beginning with the occupation of Central in 2014, the umbrella movement, and then carry on with the few protests in the last few years, sometimes you would hear young protesters complaining and saying we have not done enough. I remember a few years ago, the BBC called me up at midnight, almost midnight, and I was about to go to bed, and they say, "Oh, Ms Lau, can we do a live interview with you?" I said, okay. So we did the live interview, and then the reporter said, "Ms Lau, actually, some of the young people, they said it's all you people's fault, not necessarily just the Democratic Party, but all the other people who have fought for several decades like us. They said it's all your fault because you failed to achieve democracy. And that's why we are in a difficult position now." Well, I woke up immediately. I banged on the table, although it was a phone interview. I said, "Let me tell you, of course it's true that people in my generation, my party and other people, we have not managed to achieve democratic government. That's true. But then to say that we have done nothing, it's all our fault, I cannot accept it. Why? Because the fact that I'm free to talk to the BBC then and free to talk to you now. And also when I leave this office, I would not immediately be arrested by the National Security Police. I can walk down the street still, freely, maybe safely. I mean, all these things do not fall like manna from heaven. They are things that people in Hong Kong, your parents, my parents, grandparents, have fought for decades. So I refuse to accept accusations that we have done nothing. We have a failure. So I think if you look back for the past decades, people would think that Hong Kong is a lovely city. It's so vibrant, it's so free, it's so safe. It's just that now things have changed. But I would not accept old people or young people accusing us of not doing anything, a complete failure. No way. I think many people, if you now think back, you would appreciate that the fact that we have, even before the change of sovereignty and after the change, for a number of years, people were still free and safe, and we have the rule of law. And it's like that because of efforts by all these people in civil society to make sure that the government will not crack down on us. But I would not claim that as the achievement of my party. But of course, my party, my members work with other people in Hong Kong to achieve that. And now, at this very difficult juncture, when more and more people are getting arrested, we are still speaking out. I'm still talking to you. Maybe you'll tell me that you have difficulty finding people to speak because people are worried, which is understandable. So many journalists have told me that they can't find people to interview. So I think my party, whether I don't know how long we will be allowed to exist or whether we'll be forced to disband, but we have tried our best to defend the interests of the Hong Kong people. But I don't think at any juncture we threaten national security of China. Now that it seems that they think that, anything you move, you touch, it's national security. And that makes people very, very scared.
The Democratic Party and the pan-democratic camp have worked hard in the 24 years since the handover, both for democracy and for the numerous aspects of life and well-being here in Hong Kong. What do you consider your greatest achievements and at the same time the greatest problems which, despite your hard work and your commitment, have continued to plague Hong Kong?
Well, actually, I have been a member of the Legislative Council for 25 years.
Yes.
I served 7 terms before and after the change of sovereignty. I have fought 7 elections. I have never lost an election. So I think I can claim I know the people quite well. And I think one of the thing that I think that, that made me most happy, now that I'm no longer in the council, but what I have done when I was a legislator, was that for a brief period, a few years, I was able to work with not just the pan-democratic legislators, but legislators in the pro-government camp, pro-Beijing camp. We worked together. We're called the 8-party coalition.
Yes.
And because we could work together, we sat down. We didn't touch political issues because they would not want to upset Beijing. And we talked about local issues, about clean air, about reviving the economy after the 9/11 attack in America. We could meet and discuss these things, make compromises, and reach a consensus. So if you do that, and you have, more than 2/3 of the votes in the council, of course the administration will listen to you. I think that is the way for any parliament or Congress to behave. It's for members, for different parties, to be willing and able to sit down and talk to each other and to compromise and to reach a consensus. And for a very short period, a few years, we were allowed to do that. But then Beijing said no. Beijing said no. Why? Beijing said because Hong Kong is an executive-led government. You legislators are getting together to agree on things that's legislative-led, which they think is a no-no. So they told the pro-Beijing legislators not to meet anymore. Okay, so the coalition collapsed, but the executive was not able to lead. And the legislators, because we don't have a forum to discuss, to compromise, to reach consensus, we could not agree. So we're like Washington, we're like Congress, we're at gridlock. So on housing, on education, on many very important issues, and the administration, the proposals they put to us were quite bad. But we do not have enough votes to turn them down or to make them, to amend them. So that's the problem in Hong Kong. The executive could not lead, and they would not allow the legislators to work together. Because with any complicated policies, of course people have different views. But what you should do is to sit down and listen to each other, compromise, and try to reach a consensus. So in those few years that we were allowed to do it, I feel very happy. But since then, of course, nothing but gridlock, a lot of acrimony, a lot of hatred. So this city now, okay, it's very toxic because there is so much divergence of views. Either your views prevail or that person's view will not be accepted. How can you do that? It's very, very sad, especially after the protests in 2019. The city is completely split asunder. So I'm not saying everybody's on my side. No, there are those on the other side, and they cannot and will not talk. So it's very sad. But my feeling is it need not be like this. Even those pro-Beijing politicians, my experience is they are willing to talk. They are willing to sit down and to try to sort things out. But Beijing would not allow it. So, it's very sad.
And so what's your perspective more specifically now, zooming on into more recent developments of the ways in which the executive branch and Beijing have affected the space for discourse and discussion in Hong Kong. More specifically, how do you look at, and what's your perspective on the wave of disqualifications more recently of candidates running for LegCo elections, as well as the removal of already elected LegCo members? How do you think that? How do you interpret that? How do you interpret why that happened, and how do you think that affects, like you said, the space for discourse and the space for cooperation, even across different political parties in Hong Kong, to help solve societal problems?
Well, I think that Beijing, of course, is very upset with what happened in the last few years. And somebody described it as a state of emergency because of the protests, which, of course, many of the protests were peaceful, but some of them were quite violent. And some of the protesters all masked up, and they threw petrol bomb at police stations, at government headquarters. They set the mass transit railway station on fire, blocked the roads. So it was very, very horrific. And then the police came out. Of course, they beat up the protesters, and so people complain about police brutality, and then the other side complained about such violence. It was very bad. And Carrie Lam, the chief executive, could not do anything. So some people were very, very angry. Even those in the pro-Beijing camp, they were angry and they were frightened. So they went to Beijing. They asked Beijing to send in the military. Beijing did not do that, but Beijing then decided to give us the national security law and also to revamp the political system, thereby giving them full power to chuck out anyone they don't like. And so now the power of disqualification of candidates or even sitting legislators, they can just chuck them out. So now that's why people just feel, what is going on? We don't seem to have the rules that we used to have before. Although we don't have democracy, at least, the conduct of election is something that, is fair and open, except, of course, we have functional constituencies which allow corporations and professional groups to control many seats in the council. But now no more. They set up this committee, that committee, then vet the candidates and throw them out. So it is very bad, and people just feel disenfranchised. And but then it's also put in the law that in the Legislative Council election coming up in December, it will be against the law if you go out and tell people not to vote, or you tell people to cast a blank vote. Although both in itself is not against the law.
No.
But if you go out and tell people, then you can get 3 years in prison. So this is the situation, which is very worrying, because we hope that people should be free to express themselves. And but it seems that freedom is shrinking, is diminishing very fast.
And so amongst the different ways that you touched on of Beijing and of the administration in revamping the electoral system and electoral qualification criteria has been the government's vetting of candidates running for election both at LegCo and at district council level through the principle of patriots governing Hong Kong. What do you think of this notion on a principle level, and to what extent do you think the vetting of candidates' eligibility along these criteria of patriotism in Hong Kong might limit the political spectrum in Hong Kong? Do you think this works with the principles of the Democratic Party and how it operates?
Well, I have nothing wrong with them saying, well, we should have patriots running Hong Kong. And I think most Hong Kong people are patriotic. Of course, you will say, oh, there are some people who say they want independence. Yes, but I think that's a very small minority. And my party, if you look at my party's platform, Article 1 is the fact that Hong Kong is part of China. So I think all members of my party are patriots. I'm definitely a patriot. But the question is, we don't know what their definition is. You may say you're a patriot, but they think you are not. So who is a patriot? I don't think they have given us a definition. But I guess what it is whoever they say is a patriot is a patriot. But if they say you're not a patriot, then you're out. So, so that's not, as I said, I've stood in 7 elections, and this question never came up. And nobody has ever accused me of not being patriotic. But now, with all these different levels of assessment, of vetting, it's very difficult. And many people will not want to stand. And some people think that my party should not take part. And my party will hold an EGM next month for members to vote to decide whether we want to field candidates for the election in December. And so let's see what members think. But because it's so controversial and it's so worrying, so I just don't know. I mean, I just think that Beijing is putting a lot of pressure on us, not just my party, but on Hong Kong.
So as you say, there's been not just rumours, but also extensive media coverage of the different views within the Democratic Party, within the pan-democratic camp, and even just across different parties in Hong Kong, about different views about whether or not to contest upcoming Legislative Council and District Council elections. Some people argue that a political party actually doesn't have a purpose if it doesn't seek to contest elections. Do you agree?
Well, of course, I support, I'm sure a party, the formation of a party is, of course, you want to, not just to contest elections, but you want to form the government. You want to be the ruling party. But in Hong Kong, this has never been possible to form the government because we have the functional constituencies. So even though if you sweep the board in the direct elections, you will not have a majority in the legislature. And of course, the chief executive, which is the head of the executive authorities, is chosen by a very small committee. So for a political party to be able to become the ruling party is not possible, has never been possible under the constitutional framework. But the party still, we were formed and we have members and we have candidates standing for election. So we try to articulate the wishes and aspirations of the people. But when you come to a time when there are elections and the rules you think are not reasonable, and if you don't take part, and if the party doesn't want to take part, and many of our supporters do not want us to take part, then I think we have to think again. And it's very difficult, but that does not mean that, because you don't take part in the election, why don't you dissolve? Because, you're no longer standing for election. No. I think we're not saying that we will never stand in any future elections. But if an upcoming election, if we think that it is not democratic, it's not fair, we don't want to take part, I hope we will have that freedom. But it seems like that we don't have that as well. We're criticized for not trying to field candidates. And if we field candidates, they say that they're not democratic. So it's very difficult.
So seeing as you say that there are different views amongst the party members about the value of participating in certain types of elections, especially under certain current circumstances, could you tell us a little bit more about the specificities of the different arguments for and against?
Actually, I don't think I'm really in that position because although we are sitting in the Democratic Party office, but I am no longer in the leadership of the party. And so I don't really interact with my members that much. Since I stepped down from the legislature in 2016, and I also stepped down as the chair, I stay away. Because I'm of the view that once you are no longer the leader, you don't hang around and keep asking questions. So I do not really, talk to that many members about how this part feel like you, I read some of the comments in the media, but I have not been talking to many of them. But I agree that we should have an EGM for members to turn up and to cast their votes. Well, of course, the legislature and also the district councils they are the only two forums in which people can be elected there to represent them. And it is very sad that it is not possible, because many of my many district councillors have also resigned in the last few weeks. So that's why I said the situation is becoming more and more difficult, and that's why people feel very sad, and some feel quite desperate, because these institutions exist to represent people. And how do you get the representatives? Is they get elected. But now, if the electoral system is changed in such a way that people just don't think it's that meaningful, then of course it will not be so representative.
Given the current circumstances of how the legislative branch is being affected by the relationship with the administrative branch, how significant do you think the role of the legislative branch still is at checking and anchoring the policies of the government? How effective do you think it is?
I think that there are many Hong Kong people who are very worried, because in the past they expect the legislature to operate as some form of check and balance on the administration. But now it seems that because most of the members are, I guess, well, maybe they are too ready to be happy with the proposals of the administration, so many policies could be very quickly passed. And I'm not saying that we should throw out all the government proposals, no. But I think there should be some critical thinking and some debate and argument, and maybe some amendments and some compromise. But if that is lacking or will not exist, then, the legislature, some people will say, is not really doing its part. Of course, some people will argue that, it's very good, very efficient. But I think more people expect, difficult questions to be asked, and so that the administration will have to explain why they make such proposals. And if that doesn't exist, then I think the quality of governance, the quality of policy making will decline. And in the end, of course, the people will suffer.
And so, given the change of the nature or the effectiveness of the legislature in affecting or impacting public policy, do you see a different way forward for pan-democratic camps and even just different parties in Hong Kong in seeking other ways to affect policy?
I think that unless we are all arrested, otherwise, I think people should still speak out. We are still in civil society, whether they're political parties or NGOs or others. I think people should speak out. But of course, now the media are not that free, and so the channels for us to convey our wishes, the criticisms and suggestions are very limited. So even if you speak out, people cannot hear it, and the administration will not pay any attention. But I think the responsibility is on us, not just the political party, but other Hong Kong people should try to make their voices heard, and not to say, oh, well, it's all finished. I chuck in the towel and Hong Kong is dead. No, but we have to try, and it will be difficult. But I don't think we have any alternative.
You've talked about, of course, just now the change even to the freedom of press in Hong Kong. Historically, though, do you think Hong Kong press is effective at directly impacting public policy and driving change?
Well, I speak as someone who's worked in journalism for 15 years, and it's very strange. Journalists have always been paid very poorly. Even in the days when I was a journalist, and even up to now. And but the journalists, whether you're talking about print journalism or television, radio, they manage to attract very bright young people to work for them. And of course, in the past, they enjoy more freedom and independence. And so I think the journalists, even because of the bad pay and working conditions, I think they did quite a good job. And it's sad to see, of course, the death of the people, Apple Daily, and also other media coming under tremendous pressure, forced to conduct self-censorship, or the government station, RTHK, having many of the programs axed. But still, I think they still struggle to do a job to inform the public. And you rightly said, I mean, it's very important that we have, free media so that we can obtain information. And now, of course, people say they just get information online. But of course, that sort of, it's not really journalism, but at least it's a channel for you to get information. And it's not very balanced, and it's not that professional. So, but I think, like other things, we just try to do the best we can. And whether it's journalism, whether it's NGO, whether it's academia, all these areas, I think people have to struggle to work hard to maintain the independence, the professionalism, and the objectivity.
Well, across the history of the media and its effectiveness and its relationship with policy in Hong Kong, perhaps since the days when you were in journalism, how do you look at the evolution of effectiveness of the media's relationship with the government and with policy? Do you see a trend of change overall and a gradual evolution in its effectiveness or its nature, or do you see certain moments of aberration which were significant in the change of media effectiveness in Hong Kong?
As I said, although the media, the journalists are very poorly paid for decades, but they still work hard and they are still very, very active and very energetic. And even the president of China, former president Jiang Zemin, they're frightened. They don't want the journalists to keep following them, asking questions. So the journalists are well known. They just push, and ask questions. And even if you look at Carrie Lam, the current chief executive, when she came to power, when she first was chosen by this committee in 2017, she talked to the journalists frequently and signed a charter about, wishing to give them open access and so on. And then, of course, things deteriorated very fast then in the last few years. So I don't know. I think the journalists have tried hard, and the people thank them. And now, of course, people feel very disappointed with the loss of Apple Daily and loss of press freedom and independence in many newspapers and TV stations. But still, I don't think that we will say the game is over. I'm sure there are journalists there who will still try hard, and they have to argue with their news editors, with their producers, because the people will tell them, you can't do this, you cannot say that, don't interview this person. So, but I think they are still trying, and we have to give them our support.
And so when it's been asserted, like we said just now, by some, for example, very recently by Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, that it's strange for political parties or for political players to discuss and participate in politics without necessarily taking part in elections. Do you see this kind of discourse and this kind of discussion in the public forum as one of the main values of having political parties still speaking out?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when people in power, when they say silly things or when they say unreasonable things,
Like this.
People should, talk back. You cannot just say, oh, she said that? Is that right? You can't. People expect, a debate, arguments, discussion. So I hope no matter how difficult things will become, I hope that lively discussions can still take place. But of course, some people fear that if they do that, if they engage in that sort of discussion, they may lose their liberty. They could get arrested and put into prison. So it's very sad.
Well, do you think it's ever worth joining a forum, whether it's a public policy forum such as the LegCo or a forum of public discussion elsewhere, for participation simply for the purpose of being heard, even when there isn't necessarily the hope for being impactful?
Of course, I think we have to try anything and everything. My message is we should not give up. We should do what we can, but I say that we should be bold, we should be wise, and be careful. Try to stay out of prison. But that doesn't mean you do nothing. Everyone's situation is different. Your ability is different. So we do what we can in our position to try to help Hong Kong to safeguard the free lifestyle, the personal safety. The last thing I want to see is for people to say, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to leave. I say nothing, do nothing. No, I think we should do what we can, but try to be careful. And if there's a law, you may not like the law, but don't break the law. I'm not encouraging people to break any law, and I'm not encouraging people to use violence. But you try to use peaceful and non-violent means to express yourself. You should. And not just a few individuals, but more and more people in society should do that.
And so under these circumstances and with these principles in mind, how have you seen with the recent political developments, the Democratic Party and other parties in Hong Kong take different stances and evolutions in the ways about driving change and representing the voices of different people in Hong Kong?
Well, as I said, some people are worried. That's why they don't say much or do much. And that is very sad. So maybe even people within my party, some are like that, which I guess is understandable. But what I'm saying is, I think we should not just say, it's all finished, it's over. No, it's not. This is our home. This is the city that we love. So we should not just say, I will say no more. I will not do anything. So I will stay out of prison. No, we shouldn't do that. But of course, if people say, I'm very scared, I'm worried, of course we understand. Then you try to do things which don't break the law, don't step on the red lines, but still speak out. Do what we can.
And what are some of the new forums or new ways that you think within the law and within the circumstances we find ourselves, which make you hopeful about other opportunities to speak out? For example, in recent years, you have switched to giving interviews and giving discussions online, posted online with other former LegCo and current LegCo members, other political figures. Do you see this and some other new platforms or new ways as being exciting?
Well, I think that people are creative, especially you students in the UK. I hope that we will all, think of ways, to overcome the difficulties. Especially, if we look at the future, things are changing so fast. And some people say that, maybe in 10 years' time, many of the jobs that we know now will vanish. You have a new situation. So you need to be innovative. You need to be creative and to try to find ways to overcome the problems that you face. And not just in Hong Kong, but elsewhere. So I don't claim to have too many answers. I just do my part and to speak my mind and to try to stay out of prison. But I think others, especially with you youngsters, I'm sure you are much more creative and innovative than me. So I think let us all think and try to find ways to overcome the challenges and try to stay free and safe.
Well, speaking of not necessarily creative, but certainly alternative and other solutions about problems, are there certain moments that you look back on in the past that you think perhaps you might have regretted, or that you might think you could have done differently in to make perhaps our situation a little better, or at least different? More specifically, perhaps, in August 2014, the National People's Congress proposed the 831 framework. The framework outlined the plan for the 2017 chief executive election, which originally was supposed to be conducted via universal suffrage, but due to this new framework, incorporated an initial nomination committee as well as a new criterion of patriotism. How do you reflect on the Democratic camp's role in the 2015 electoral reform, and in particular voting down the framework?
Well, I think that proposal from Beijing, and they call it universal suffrage, which was something that I could not accept, and I think my party could not accept because of all the restrictions they put on the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
I think the definition of universal suffrage, it is an election that does not have any unreasonable limitations, thereby giving the voters genuine choice. But if you have unreasonable limitations, and because of those limitations, the voters cannot have genuine choice, then it's not by universal suffrage. So that was the reason why we could not accept it. If you say, no, it's not universal suffrage, but it is a step forward, that's different. That means we are still on the way to universal suffrage. But no, you say this is the end game, this is it. We're going to have a form of system whereby there's no, there are lots of limitations and people have no genuine choice. And then you call it universal suffrage. How's that possible? So that's why we objected to it. And and some people, of course, think that we should have accepted it. And I mean, I understand there are people with different views, but on that occasion, I think we just have to agree to disagree.
Well, like you said, some people argue that the 831 framework is the closest, if not actually there, Hong Kong has ever come to universal suffrage. And people such as current LegCo President Andrew Leung have actually criticized and mocked the Pan-Democrats for refusing to, in Cantonese, doi ju xin, which means pocket it first, or accepting something that's short of full direct universal suffrage. Do you have any views on doi ju xin and whether or not?
But as I said, because it's not genuine universal suffrage, and you call it that, so it is like insulting someone's intelligence. So, and many Hong Kong people, they don't want to pocket it. So it's very sad. I don't know, I mean, maybe that's the way Beijing said, okay, I said, I'll give you a universal suffrage. This is my definition. Take it or leave it. So it's very sad.
Were it to have been framed in a different way, and to have been framed as, like you said, a step in the right direction, would you have considered something along the lines of that? Do you believe in the principle or the possibility of partial democracy?
Well, I think democracy is like pregnancy. Either you are pregnant or you are not. You can't be partially pregnant and you can't be partially democratic. But, as I said earlier, although we're not a democracy, but we enjoy so many trappings of a democracy, much more than people in countries which have periodic democratic elections. So that's the thing about Hong Kong. Never had democracy, but the people were so free, so safe, and so happy. But still, you cannot call it a democracy, because we're not. What is a democracy? It's a place where people freely, independently elect their government. And that's something that we've never been able to do.
Well, what do you think actually people in Hong Kong want democracy for, specifically in terms of social policies, in terms of specific practical needs? What do you think Hong Kongers want out of democracy? And what do you think the Hong Kong government has been able to or unable to deliver in terms of its offers of partial democracy?
I think some different people have different views on what they want. I remember quite a number of years ago, some professionals said to me, Ms Lau, do you know what democracy is for? I said, what is it for? He said, oh, democracy is to protect our freedoms. And we're so free. So why do we need it? He said. So he thinks that's what it's for. Others will tell you we want democracy because we want better livelihood. We want to have to live in a bigger space rather than just 20 square feet, you know. And somebody said we want education, better education for our children. We want better health care. So these are things. So it's very, very difficult. But I think that many people, especially now, we see things collapsing around our ears. They want a system to ensure that they can be free to express themselves, to have a religion or no religion, to have, to think freely, speak freely, write freely, to perform freely. Those things now, I think more and more people discover they are very important. But of course, they are disappearing very fast. And of course, the government in Beijing, they were prepared to exercise restraint, and they did not use all the powers that they could to crack down on people's freedom of expression. And that's very important. I think even in a democratic country, those people have power, especially if they have military power or the power to control the police and so on. They need to exercise restraint. Because if suddenly some people do things they don't like, okay, send in the police, use the tear gas, beat them up, arrest them, throw them into jail. So if they behave like that, it would be terrible. So in the past, we've seen Beijing and the Hong Kong authorities exercising restraint. So that's why the civil society can be so free and so vibrant. But now we see that they don't exercise restraint. They just want to come down on us like a ton of bricks.
And on the front of restraint, on the front of the protection of Hong Kong, so to speak, what do you think overall is the value of, as you mentioned at the start of the interview, one country, two systems, both to Hong Kong and perhaps to China as well? What is its value?
How can I speak for Beijing? And also, one country, two systems is not our invention. It's Beijing's invention, and they foisted it on us. But at that time, the people felt they're Chinese. Hong Kong is Chinese soil. So I think most people did not want to come out and ask the British to stay. So we have end of colonial rule. But the people were very afraid that under Chinese rule, they would lose their freedoms. And then the Chinese said, don't worry. Deng Xiaoping, the paramount leader, said, we will definitely take Hong Kong back in 1997. But you need not worry, because Beijing will not send communist cadres to run Hong Kong. Why? Because we give you one country, two systems. Under this policy, Hong Kong people will run Hong Kong. And the free lifestyle that you've had, the rule of law and all that would be preserved for 50 years after 97, up to the year 2047. We are now not even halfway there. And now it seems our freedoms are disappearing. So we could enjoy those freedoms because Beijing allows us. Beijing exercised restraint. And now Beijing has no more restraint. They'll come in and do whatever they like. That's why people are so fearful. So Beijing invented one country, two systems. Obviously, then they thought it was useful. Maybe now, I don't know whether they still think it's useful or not. But I think Hong Kong is a very famous international city. We are part of China. But many foreigners come to work here, to live here, to study here. They used to love it because it's so efficient, it's so safe, it's so free. So, to allow such a city to continue should be good not just for Hong Kong, but good for China and good for the international community too. But I don't know. I don't know what Beijing wants to do.
And what do you think should be and is, in practicality, the responsibility of the Hong Kong administration in protecting the two systems side of one country, two systems?
Well, the Hong Kong administration should understand the wishes of the aspirations here, although they are not elected by the people, and they should reflect these concerns to Beijing and urge Beijing not to crack down on our freedoms. So that because the Hong Kong people, most people have no access to the leadership in Beijing, but the Hong Kong government does. They should go and tell Beijing not to, destroy one country, two systems, not to destroy the freedoms, the personal safeties that we value so much.
Well, looking forward, do you see any other ways for people in Hong Kong to work around this lack of communication to help make known to China?
Well, we just have to continue to speak out. Like now I'm talking to you, and you take this back to the UK, and I don't know. I mean, we need to just find the courage to speak out, because we are decent, upstanding human beings. We should always speak out with dignity, with courage. But of course, we do things within the law.
Well, then, looking forward, do you look at the future of Hong Kong with hope, with fear, or with what attitude?
Well, all I can say is that things are difficult and may get even more difficult, and maybe I will be in prison, but the game is not over. We should not just say, Hong Kong is finished, don't come here. The Hong Kong people will no longer enjoy the freedoms, the personal safety. I say, no, we have to fight for it. As I said, these things do not fall like manna from heaven. We have to fight for it. And especially you and your generation, the young people, you have to fight for it. But do it in a peaceful and non-violent way.
And so finally, what do you expect to be the specific challenges coming to us in the coming months and years?
I don't know. Things are happening so fast. Whatever I say to you will be out of date in a matter of days or weeks. So, as I said, things are going to be difficult, but we should not lose hope, and we should do what we can to fight for a free Hong Kong.
I'm sure our young people of Hong Kong and of the world will take great value and great inspiration from your words. Thank you very much, Ms Lau.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next question, we have a question in the chat box. I've received it directly, and this person would like to ask Ms Lau, do you think the freedom of the press in Hong Kong has diminished, judging from the closure of a newspaper in the last few months, and the changes in policy of RTHK, the publicly funded radio channel in Hong Kong? Can any trend be deduced from these events?
Well, I think the freedom of the press has diminished very much. And I spoke to journalists, and many of them are very worried, and some are very frightened. And of course, they don't want to get arrested. Some of them have been arrested, and some have been beaten up, and some, of course, have lost their job. And so I guess it's not as difficult as in some other countries, but it's getting very difficult. But as I said, there are still journalists, some young journalists, who are not afraid, and they will continue to stay in the profession and continue to fight for the space, for the freedom to do independent reporting. And such journalists still exist. But like other people, we are all under tremendous pressure.
Thank you, Ms Lau. Any other questions?
Miss, is there a question for Miss?
Yes, that is Ms.
Yeah, here it is.
Thank you for such an inspiring interview. I wanted to ask, How do you see sort of the future of activism, particularly from the youth?
Well, it's very difficult because I think many youths have been frightened, intimidated, and some have left Hong Kong. And of course, quite a number are in prison. They have been arrested and charged. So it's difficult. But I repeat, I don't think young people or older people should just lose hope and say nothing more to fight for. Because, I mean, as we speak, if we look at the countries around the world, well, there are many in far worse off position than Hong Kong. We're better than Afghanistan. We're better than Myanmar. We're better than Cambodia. But there are many countries which have terrible conditions. So, and I don't think the people there, not too many of them give up. So I don't think giving up should be in our dictionary. I think that's why I'm talking to you. I think young people, especially, should have this fighting spirit. But as I said, do it in a wise way. I mean, if you fight very hard and you lose your life, then it's not worth it. But also, you must find creative, safe ways of doing things so that you can continue to be free and continue to carry on with the struggle. It's a big challenge. But then life is always full of challenges. So you might as well learn to take on these challenges as soon as possible. And so another one is that Barry. Thank
Hello.
you, Miss. Hi, Barry. Can we see you?
Yeah,
Hi.
about that. Hi. Thank you so much. The interview was absolutely amazing. I had a question about, you repeatedly were urging not to break the law and to be very cautious when protesting and when engaging in activism. But if the law no longer, if it comes to a time where the law no longer protects Hong Kong citizens and it threatens their rights and their freedoms, would you still encourage citizens to follow the law? Would there ever be a time that, as a party, you would encourage citizens to break laws imposed by Beijing?
Well, I have broken the law before. And of course, we call that civil disobedience. And if you do that, you should also be ready to take the consequence. Because if you break the law, although it may be a bad law, you could get arrested. So you have to weigh things up. And sometimes some people like to resort to violence because they feel that, all these peaceful demonstration is not getting us anywhere. So they want to be more violent. But then I said, you want to resort to violence. Can you be more violent than the police? Can you be more violent than the People's Liberation Army? So I take your question. And if we see the struggle in many countries, there are people who resort to different means because they feel that the peaceful means doesn't work. But I think I speak from the situation in Hong Kong. And I think many Hong Kong people, and you must have seen our big demonstrations, almost 1 million people or more coming out. Why? Why do so many come out? And they came out not just by themselves. They came out with their babies. They came out with the grandfather, and some of them came out on crutches. Why did they come out? Because they thought it was peaceful. They wanted to come out and express themselves. But if it becomes very violent, many will not come out. So it's a choice. And whatever decision you make, you have to take the consequence. And also, if you want to have a struggle or demonstration, you want more people to join. And in the case of Hong Kong, many more people will come out if it's peaceful. If it is not, They will not come out. I don't know whether you remember pictures of our big demonstrations. People were everywhere. And suddenly there was an ambulance because someone had fainted. So the ambulance came, and it was like Moses dividing up the Red Sea. The people just pulled back and the ambulance passed. And then the people come back again. See, that's Hong Kong. That's the Hong Kong I want people to remember. But of course, you also remember the scenes of people throwing Molotov cocktail and burning things. And of course, some of the people are now in prison, and some have left Hong Kong. So I think I can say that according to the Hong Kong character, I think most Hong Kong people want to use peaceful means to express themselves. But you say, oh, where does that get you? Now you are, yes, it's very frustrating. But even at this frustrating stage, I still insist we should struggle in a peaceful and non-violent way, because we just cannot be more violent than the military. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Another anonymous question I've just received says...
Josh, is it Josh?
Oh,
Josh wants to speak.
Sure, why not? We will let Josh go first.
Where's Josh?
Hello, sorry if that got in the way there, but thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting, very informative. I was just wondering, what do you think of the British government's response to the Hong Kong situation, not only in most recent years, but over the past sort of 20 years, and generally since the handover? Has the British government been supportive? Have they not done enough, or have they just been unable to respond post the handover?
Well, I think that post-handover, there was this very famous expression, I don't remember which politician who said that, oh, the future of Hong Kong is behind us. So what's the future? The future for Britain is trade, is commerce, to make money. That's what they've always been most interested in. And but I said, you have run Hong Kong for 1.5 centuries. You did not give us democracy and no protection for human rights. So certainly, I think it's quite disgraceful. You know, you're so young, but you heard of Maggie Thatcher. Have you heard of Maggie Thatcher? You know, I was the Hong Kong correspondent of the Far Eastern Economic Review when I attended Maggie Thatcher's press conference in December of 1984, after she signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration with Chinese Premier Zhao Ziyang in Beijing. Then she flew to Hong Kong to hold a press conference to tell us, oh, we've done a deal with China, we're going to hand you back in 1997. And I was the Far Eastern Economic Review correspondent. And I said, Prime Minister, you signed an agreement with China 2 days ago, promising to deliver over 5 million people into the hands of a communist dictatorship. Is that morally defensible? Or is it really true that in international politics, the highest form of morality is one's own national interest? Thatcher, of course, she was prepared for such a question. She said, what do you mean? Huh? We've done everything we could for you. Britain has done everything we could for Hong Kong. And everyone in Hong Kong is happy with the agreement. Everyone is happy. And you may be a solitary exception. And if you've read George Orwell's 1984, solitary exception is the definition for insanity. That's what Maggie thought of me. And then a few years later, I got myself elected as the first woman directly elected to the Legislative Council with a whopping majority, just to show I'm not a solitary exception. So anyway, to answer your question, I think Britain should have done more. And but now finally, they came up with the BNO, the 5+1 scheme. And now, as you can see, there are many Hong Kong people arriving in Britain every day, taking advantage of that. And so I think many Hong Kong people are very happy because it gives them an option to get out. And many are taking advantage of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Lau. We currently have two anonymous questions that where people want me to read out the question. We also have one question from Daniil, who's lining up to speak in person. I'll read one anonymous question out, and then we'll intermit the two anonymous questions with Daniil's question. So the next anonymous question is, one of the ways that the Hong Kong government has cracked down on political participation from the pro-democracy camp is through economic consequences, especially including the recollection of already paid wages of disqualified legislators. Do you think that this will discourage resistance long term, and how would you hope to work around this?
Sorry, come again. What did you say that they've done?
Oh, sorry, I'll go again. One of the ways that the Hong Kong government has cracked down on political participation from the pro-democracy camp is through economic consequences, especially through the recollection, the rescinding of already paid wages of disqualified legislators.
Oh, yeah.
So do you think this will? Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think that what the questioner probably was saying, that they could disqualify a legislator or even a district council member, and then they threaten and they say, we will make you pay back all the money that we've given you since you took office. So, of course, it could be a lot of money, the salary as well as the expenses that they got to hire staff and to rent office. So it is a very big threat. And so anyway, I mean, economically, politically, it's a pressure that they put on people. That's why over 200 members of the district councils have resigned. And now today, as we speak, today is the first day that they asked these remaining district council members to take an oath. But after you've taken the oath, then they decide whether you would be disqualified or not. And just then I saw on the news that of the 20-odd people who took the oath today, 7 are from the pro-democracy camp. And they received letters from the government saying they're not yet disqualified, but they asked them many questions, and they have to reply to those questions by Monday. And if the answers are not satisfactory, they will be disqualified. And some of the questions related to the primary election that was held last year. And so, so all these pressures, and so they just want people to be frightened and want those that they don't like to just quit. Hi, on, where are you?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Right, next up we have a question from Daniel, who'd like to ask directly.
Daniel, where's Daniel?
Hi. Thank you for speaking. It was very enjoyable. The question I had was, so I saw on the Wikipedia page that you were educated in the US and in the UK, and I wanted to, at university level, Berkeley and LSE. And I just wanted to know how an education in those countries affected perhaps your political views, but also perhaps your views of Hong Kong and China, if you kind of saw at firsthand Orientalism and how it changed your view on democracy and so forth. So yeah.
I went to University of Southern California in the US, and I went to LSE, yeah. And I think the exposure was very good because it showed me, how things are done in America and also in the UK. And of course, actually, when I was in America, because that was a long time ago, I don't know whether you have heard about the Watergate situation, in which two journalists from the Washington Post wrote so many stories about this. There was a burglary in the Democratic Party headquarters, and finally, it brought down the president. President Richard Nixon had to resign. And so, because of that, many young people were so galvanized, and many of them rushed into the university to study journalism, and they all wanted to be Woodward and Bernstein. And so I was one of the people who were motivated. And that's why after I finished, I studied journalism at USC. And when I got back to Hong Kong, I worked as a journalist. So I must say the foreign experience is very good. And at LSE, of course, I met many foreign students. And I think even, I'm sure at Cambridge, you must have foreign students too, a lot. And it's very good that you get people from different culture, different nationality mixing together. And I think it's terrific. And I certainly hope that students from many different countries will have the ability, will be able to go abroad to study. And I hope in my way, I would like to help them, because it is a very, very valuable experience, and it is tremendous. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We also have one more anonymous question. So the question is, what the DP, as in the Democratic Party, is advocating, universal suffrage, is the same as 10 years ago. However, what the youths in Hong Kong fight for today is no longer only about universal suffrage, as in choosing a person to be the chief executive. Instead, it's more about, for example, differentiation from China, or even breaking a system filled with vested interests. Do you believe that the DP currently realizes this reality?
Yes, I think that there are youths with different views, and it is not possible for my party to to represent all those views. So we have to take a position, especially on something that fundamental. And as I said earlier, and in the interview with you I said Article 1 of my party's platform is that we are part of China. So for those who do not like that, of course, they will not like my party. And but I want to explain to you that it is in Hong Kong, I don't think there are too many other options. And and that's why one country, two systems was something that people supported, because you stay as part of China, but then the Chinese government promised to allow you to be free, to be safe, and to have the rule of law. Whereas if you want to fight for something else, it would be very difficult. And so, and some of the youth, if they really feel like that, then of course, my party cannot represent them.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms Lau. And we have another anonymous question now, which is simply asking, do you think one country, two systems will still be a good example for Taiwan?
I don't think so. I think the Taiwanese are looking on what's happened to Hong Kong. And some people, of course, may even say that one country, two system is finished. And so when the Taiwanese people see Hong Kong, and there are quite a number of Hong Kong people moving to Taiwan. Some, of course, come to the UK, but some go to Taiwan. And these people go there because they are also very frightened and they are very, very worried. So if they see that and they see the arrests in Hong Kong, the imprisonment and closure of Apple Daily, crackdown in RHK, of course, the Taiwanese people say, no, we don't want that. They don't want that in Taiwan, which is, of course, understandable.
Thank you. And then another anonymous question asking, I think the social movement in 2019 more or less reflects Hong Kong people not trusting the Democratic Party or the pro-democratic camp as much as it used to. How do you look at that?
Well, I don't know. I think if you look at the struggle in 2019, it has really split the city up into not just two parts, but different parts. And there are people who want to go this way, and there are those who want to go that way, which, of course, we have to respect. But you know, a few months ago, I took part in an event in the UK. Maybe you can look it up. It's called the Festival of Ideas. And they were talking, one section was talking about pro-democracy struggle in different countries and in different places. And in the case of Hong Kong, they interviewed me and also another journalist called Mr. Stephen Bynes, who has now left Hong Kong. He's come back to the UK. And I was asked, what was the lesson learned in your protests, particularly the occupation in 2014 or the protests in 2019? And I said, one lesson, which I hope we all have learned, is that we need to accept that there are people with different views, even those who may be protesting together. But if you feel that anyone who has a view which is different from yours, then you call that person a traitor. You call it betrayal. Wow. How do you unite people? How do you work with them? Sometimes, maybe young people or maybe older people, they think a lot of themselves, and they think they've got it always right. Anyone else who thinks differently is wrong. And then start accusing and attacking them. Well, if we are like that, we don't need any enemies. Because if you are working with people and then you start pointing fingers at each other. So, of course, I don't think my party will claim we represent everybody and all that. We know there are different views. So that's why I think in the interview I did with you on, and also in the Q&A just then, I used this word a number of times. It's compromise. We need to compromise. But of course, we don't want to jettison all our principles. But life, it must be full of compromises because nobody can always have things his way or her way. You have to deal with people, you discuss, you negotiate, you argue, you debate, you compromise, and then you try to reach a consensus. But if you're always attacking each other, how do you build consensus? Without consensus, how do you go forward? So these are very important questions that you young people have to take on board and consider. So we cannot represent everybody. We know there are some people who disagree with us, but I hope you understand, especially if you are in a big movement, you just cannot have one voice. Everybody follow? No, you have to listen, to compromise, and try to reach a consensus.
Anybody else have other questions? I have one more anonymous question I've just received, asking, Ms Lau, in your political career, what do you regard as your greatest achievement and what's your greatest regret?
Well, I think I answered you when you asked me the question in the interview. The achievement was working with 6, 7, 8 other political parties from different, background, so that we can form a coalition. We call that the 8-party coalition in the Legislative Council. And so when we agree on things, of course, the administration will have to listen to us because there are 50 odd of us, so many votes. And my biggest regret is, in 1994, I moved a private member's bill to have a fully directly elected legislative council. In those days, members could move private members' bill on such an important thing. But after 97, the basic law does not allow members to do it. But under colonial rule, we could do it. I mean, isn't it crazy? We could do it, and I have that bill. And I was defeated by 1 vote. Very sad. That's big regret. Any other questions? It's getting close to midnight in Hong Kong now. Any other questions?
Yes, any other questions? All right, I've just got another anonymous question again. Do you think the majority of members of the Democratic Party will want the party to stand for elections later this year?
I think it's just my guess. As I told you earlier in my interview, I have not spoken to many of them, but I think many of them do not want it because they think the election is quite meaningless. But anyway, we don't have to wait too long because there will be an EGM on the 26th of September, and then you will know how my members vote.
Yes, exactly. And that draws us towards the end of our event today. So firstly, thank you once again to Ms Emily Lau. Thank you so much. And thank you as well to all of you today who participated in our event today, and especially those of you who asked questions. So do please also remember to keep an eye out for the King's Politics term card at the beginning of term, which begins shortly, of course, which will list all of our other exciting speakers scheduled for Michaelmas term, a list, of course, which Ms Emily Lau has very excitingly kicked off for us. Also, if you'd like to revisit this event today, including the recorded part as well as all the questions we asked and had answered by Ms Lau, as well as all the other events we have upcoming for the rest of the academic year, all of these will be posted on our YouTube channel, so please remember to subscribe to the channel. It's simply called King's Politics. So thank you very much once again, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.